fell into them. And the father saw him falling. He went.
It's warning you. So I thought about where to start in Bible study with you all as we start on this journey. And I thought about maybe doing a gospel, and I may do that for my Sunday morning, or if I start another one in the day or something like that. But then I decided, why not start at the beginning? For me, I love the Gospels and I love the first 5 books of the Bible. Those are my 2 favorite spots. Regardless of what you believe about the book of Genesis, I believe it tells us everything we need to know about the human condition and the story of why God is doing what he's doing. And so we can debate the finer points of it, whether it's historical fact, whether you see it more as just allegory. There's some merit in that, but for me, what I hope that you'll find is that it's our story, and it tells us of why God has done what he's done, why God is doing what he's doing, and what God plans to do in the future. Does that make sense? So for me, I call myself a biblical maximist. That's my own term. It's something I came up with in seminary, because all of Scripture for me is God-breathed. That's what it says in Timothy. And it comes to us as a love letter from God. But it all has different purposes. It has different modes of transportation. So for instance, here we're going to start at least in Genesis 1, and that's a poem. You read poetry a little different than you read story. You read story a little differently than you read lists of numbers and architectural details. But yet all of those things are in Scripture. And so for me, I say, what is this? And so that helps us define what its goal is. Scripture for me is a flashing neon sign to a relationship with the God behind it. So this book is extremely important. It's vitally important. But it means nothing if you don't have a relationship with the God behind it. Does that make sense? I mean, you can know everything about this book and still miss the point. So if you don't get anything else, I hope that you get a deeper relationship with God, regardless of whether you get any biblical knowledge. Does that make sense? So with that, I wanted to start, and what I normally do is I would normally read a paragraph at a time, and I'm going to ask you just a couple of questions. What stands out to you? What do you notice? What do you see? And what does that make you ask? What is the question that comes from that being stood out? And then as we discuss what it might mean, what it might have meant to the original people who heard it for the first time and why it was written down, then ultimately I'll ask, what's that mean for us today? Does that make sense? But for tonight, at least one time through, I want to read through the entire first book of Genesis. And I'm not saying we're going to make it all the way through this tonight, but I'm going to read through it because I believe this is actually a poem. Genesis 1:1 all the way through Genesis 2, verse 3 is a singular poem. It's a poem that was actually written to be a responsive reading. So you'd have somebody like me at a worship service, and they would read, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night." And the reader would stop, and the people would say, "And there was evening and there was morning the first day." It was meant to be read in worship. That's what this poem was meant for. So first and foremost, before you think anything else, as I finish reading the rest of chapter 1, realize that what we're doing tonight is worship. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so this, while it was written to explain creation, it was meant to explain creation in such a way that it would elicit worship from God's people. Does that make sense? So I'm going to read the rest of it, and then we'll come back and we'll go paragraph by paragraph. Make sense? All right. "And God said, 'Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters.' And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so." And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place. Let the dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kind, and the trees bearing fruit in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the third day. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let the birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm according to their kind, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters of the sea, and let the birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God made man in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, over every living thing that moves on the earth. And God said, behold, I have given you every plant yielding its seed that is on the face of the earth, and every tree with seed in it. You shall have them for food. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath of life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw that everything he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. Have you ever taken time to read the whole thing like that? When you do so, what stands out to you? What do you notice? Anybody? Order? Order. There's an absolute order to this. And it's interesting. What? He did a lot in just a short amount of time, or however long it took him to do it, but he did a lot. More than any one of us could ever do. Give me 100 million lifetimes, and there's no way I could do that. I'm fairly creative, but not that creative. What else stands out to you? Anything?
One thing that I wonder, did he choose each and every plant, each and every critter?
Well, I don't know. Realistically, this poem doesn't tell us specifically, does it? But it does give us a little bit of a clue, because it uses an interesting word. Notice it doesn't say species. It says kind. That stuck out to me a number of years ago. What do you think kind means? Just out of curiosity. Or does yours have something different? Did it say anybody else's translation say something other than the according to their kind. What do you think kind means? Anybody?
Variety.
Variety?
Well, if you take the example just of simple cattle, within that name, there are all kinds of different types of cattle.
Yes. So, for instance, we just took Jisung, our foreign exchange student, down to the Adams County Fair. And you've got, amongst cows, you've got Holsteins and Herefords and, limousines and, there's all different kinds of cows. But they can all interbreed. They are of a kind. And the reality is we know that our regular cows can actually breed with the bison and the buffalo. And there's nothing negative comes out of that. They're of the same kind. And you could take those and probably even make them with the wild oxen that they use in Africa. They're of the same kind. So whether God created all the bison and the buffalo and the oxen and the cows, or if he created the bovine kind, I don't know. But still, it's interesting that we have this reality of kind. I mean, look what we've done in just the last 100 years with canines. Anybody had dog people? Anybody got a dog?
How many?
What kinds of dogs do you got?
2 boxers and 1 spaniel.
2 boxers and 1 spaniel. Very different, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
Personalities are different between breeds. Characteristics are different between breeds. What's their natural instincts? Some of them are hunters, some of them are ratters, some of them are companions. But yet the reality is they're all just dogs. And you can take those dogs and you can even kind of mix them with the wolves and then dingoes and other canines. And so I don't know exactly what God is saying here, but there's a sense in which creation continues the work of creating. God started this thing, and then we as creation took it and exploded beyond it. The trees multiplied, the plants of the field multiplied. I mean, I've been sitting on my porch for the last month watching the plants and the flowers grow that somebody planted before I got there. And they're beautiful, and yet they're extremely unique. And maybe God created each and every one of them individually, or maybe God said, okay, creation, here you go. Go and do what I've already done. Continue to create. And so
Another thing that I pondered for years, day 1, day 2, day 3, it doesn't say how long a day is. Is it an earth day? It is a heavenly day. Is day in God's life 1,000,000 earth years?
So that was one of the first things that struck out to me when Asbury Seminary made me learn Hebrew. The word day, the word that's written there in Hebrew, can mean day, it can mean month, it can mean year, it can mean eon. It means a chunk of time. And the Hebrews use it almost interchangeably. You have to look at it in context to figure out what they're doing. So maybe it was 6 literal 24-hour days. It very well could be. I mean, that's an accurate translation of what the word means. It could also mean 6 grand epics of what God is doing. And so, like I said, for me personally, I tend to lean more towards it 6 literal 24-hour periods. But I can see where someone could make an argument that maybe it was a little longer. But the reality is we know as human beings, you could give us as billions and billions of years and we could still never do what God has done. God has done this. And like you said, order, right? There's a definite order to this. I actually see this and at first I used to think it was 2 sets of 3, but I've come to think I think there are actually 3 sets of 3, and we'll discuss that. What's day 1? What does God do in day 1?
Light.
Light. But by creating light, he's also creating what? Dark. What's day 2? Land, sky, seas. Is that what I heard? So land, sky, seas. What's day 3? Vegetation. Vegetation? I'm confused. Did we mess that up somewhere?
Day 2 is just the water and the land.
Day 2 is just the water and the land?
Well, in the sky.
Or was day 2 just about separating waters?
No, day 2 was the sky. And the waters.
So day 2 was just the sea and the sky. So day 3 was land and vegetation, right?
Yes.
Are we tracking? Okay. So what was day 4? Sun, moon, stars. Do I see a correlation here? What, okay,
I have a little bit
what do you got there?
of interpretation of that, I guess. Where's the earth coming?
What?
Where's the earth coming?
So Earth says it was there, but what does it say it was?
Well,
Dark and void.
Dark and void. What's it say at the beginning of verse 1? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. So the first thing God created is earth. But into that, the earth was formless and void. And into that, God says, let there be light. So we do have earth. Earth is a part of day 1. But one of the big things he creates in day 1 is the light. And it's interesting because if you think of our modern science, would we think that light and darkness get created before sun and stars?
Heaven has its own light source.
Possibly. It's neat for me because I'm a science guy. My first major in college was chemistry. And if you start talking to astrophysicists, they say that the light is created before it coalesces into a sun. Now, the Bible's not necessarily a science textbook, but I find that interesting, don't you? That it would create light before it would become a sun. Nice little tidbit. But so day 4 seems to be a filling of what God created in day 1, isn't it? What about day 5? What? Birds and fish or sea creatures. You see an order to that? So do you think that's going to continue with day 6? Day 6, what do we have? Living creatures, humans, livestock, creepies, and humanity. And the pronouncement of food, right? That the vegetation that he made here on day 3 had a purpose of food for what he produced on day 6. Now, you guys aren't going to get this, but for Don and Hannah in particular, when I was reading this, I noticed the 4 creatures from Revelation. You've got the bird, you've got the beast, you've got the livestock, and you've got man. So at the end of the story, he comes back and he grabs what he did right at first. That'll come in down the road. But I had to give that to them since they journeyed with me in the spring through the book of Revelation. I don't know why I had never noticed that before, but that's there. So there's an absolute order to this. And of course, these are 2 sets of 3, right? Well, what's the number 3? Anybody know what 3 is in faith and biblical? It's the number for God. 3 is the number for God. Well, so what happens in day 7? It says the Father rests, right? One of the things that I've come to believe, and this is just Samuel, this is not anything I was taught in seminary, this is not anything that I read in a book, but as I've been studying scripture, I think at the end of day 8, Jesus the Son rests. And after studying Revelation at the end of day 9, the Spirit rests. And you see that in Revelation. When does Jesus rest? At the end of the Gospels, when he is ascended into heaven and he sits at the right hand of the Father. And so this great epic starts in chapter 1 with God creating everything on purpose, with a purpose. The light and the darkness distinguish what is day and what is night. The sea and the sky separate the heavenlies from the earthly. The land creates space amongst the water for creation, for beings. The sun and the stars in day 4, it says it's for seasons and years and festivals and feasts. We count our life based on the sun, the moon, and the stars, don't we? That's where we get our monthly calendar from, is the moon. That's how we get our day, is from the sun. The birds and the fish, this reality of filling creation. And it's all done on purpose. God is very purposeful in what he's doing. There's nothing accidental about this. It's one of the few things, if you are an evolution person, that's great, and we can discuss or debate that, but Darwinian evolution says that we were a happy accident. But my God says, no, you were never an accident. I did this on purpose. I did it with purpose. And ultimately, it's because God wants to be in relationship with us. That's what we'll see as we dig into chapter 2.
Okay, another question.
Go for it.
God said he created man in our image.
I wonder if that's our.
I was waiting for Tom to say that too.
What do you think it means?
There could be a whole heavenly family up there. Look like us.
Could be.
Could be image as maybe a short for imagination. Not a bit of imagination.
As a Christian who was raised believing in the Trinity, I used to always say that hour is the divine hour, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. That's an easy out. And of course, we see all of the Trinity at work right here in day 1, don't we? You see God creating, the Spirit hovering, and God speaking. Now, the reality is, and I've really come to discern this back in 2018, I invited my church to walk all the way through the Bible. And we did a study we called There Is No BC. There is no before Christ, because Christ always has been. And if you have that in mind, that Christ has always been, and you start reading through the Old Testament, you actually find Jesus everywhere. Anytime there is a divine manifestation that people encounter a physical reality of God, they're encountering a pre-incarnate Christ. The reality is in John's gospel, he refers to Jesus as the Word, and the Word was made flesh. And so anytime that God speaks, the Word speaks, right? So read, let's just go back to the first two verses. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, God the Father. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, Father, Spirit, Son. All three of them were there. So this our image could be that. It could also be the heavenly host. Most scholars would have no problem saying that God created the angels before he created this world as we know it. The more I read the Old Testament, the more I realize that heavenly host might be a little bigger than what I ever thought. Especially when you start reading different things and he talks about the gods. It seems like God, the Father, speaks to the gods. I don't know what that means. I'm still figuring that out. But there's a reality of this divine host that God the Father is speaking to. Who exactly is in it? We don't know, because let's face it, we're not there. We're not that kind of being. We're a temporal, physical being. Bare minimum, I still want to lean here that God is speaking about making humanity in his image in the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But I don't know. The Jewish people believed in a whole host of spiritual beings that God created before he made physical beings. The Jewish people believed that, the other gods were spiritual beings, but they were not as powerful as God. They couldn't hold a candle to God. And anytime God wanted to, he could step in and just show him who's boss. And he did, often did. The Jewish people believed that when they went to war, they weren't just warring against the physical people, but they were warring against spiritual people. I mean, Paul kind of hints at that, doesn't he? We do not battle against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities and the spiritual rulers of this world. So, I don't know. I'm willing to admit, Jim, I don't know. I'm comfortable here. I'm very comfortable with Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. I tend to land there, but God seems to imply that there's a much bigger reality than just what we see and touch.
Now let's go back to your day 4. That they made the sun and the moon, and that's how we mark our days.
Mm-hmm.
So day 1, day 2, day 3 did not have sun and moon.
Correct?
So you're thinking that it's a 24-hour day because you didn't have days in it.
Which is why I say the word means day. It means a period of time. It can mean an eon,
Like a
an
long
epic.
Yes.
The time frame, I think, is less important. Because let's face it, God is beyond our time. And as you said, realistically, it's not until you get to day 4 where he says, I've given you something to mark days and weeks and months and years. And so realistically, I don't know that we can, maybe these 3 are 24-hour days, which if that's still the case, man, God is miraculously powerful, isn't he? I mean, just, first of all, something I read recently said that in our Milky Way galaxy, there's like 400 billion stars. And that's just one galaxy amongst billions of galaxies. I'm not for sure if you gave me everything needed to make a star, I could do it in one day, let alone to make billions upon billions upon billions of them in a day.
Well, then you have the Big Bang Theory where it all exploded, shot out across the universe. However, where did the stuff that exploded come from?
So the president of Asbury Theological Seminary, where I graduated from, my last semester was his first, and he preached a sermon that he called the 3 seconds that science can't explain. He said, if we give science everything they claim, let's say they're 100% correct, there's still 3 seconds science can't explain. The Big Bang. What caused it? I mean, physics says that you can't create out of nothing. It's just not possible. But in Genesis, it says our God spoke. So even if they're right about the Big Bang, even if that's how it all came about, God spoke. And that's where the stuff came from when there was no stuff before that. He said the second set science can't explain is, why is it that whenever we go to the zoo, it's Homo sapiens looking at chimpanzees in a cage, not the other way around? Science says that we're like 99.95% the same in DNA. So why is it that we're the smart ones and we're the ones that do all this stuff and they're the ones in the cage? I mean, if evolution is everything they say in science is real, then why? Well, we'll get to it in chapter 2, but in chapter 2 it says,
You said something earlier about creation going on, and thinking, is that not evolution? I'm not saying I would go one way or the other, but
so there's a difference between microevolution and macroevolution. We absolutely can affirm microevolution, this reality that creation continues to create, and we have speciation. We have, like I said, dogs. We're partial to smaller dogs because we live in a parsonage and we never know who's going to visit. If you have a big dog and you're in a parsonage, then people kind of stop visiting. Maybe we should get big dog. But just think of what we've done with dog breeds in the last 100 years. I mean, how many different new breeds have we come up with? And they're extremely unique. So microevolution, we absolutely can affirm. It's a reality. Speciation is real. The species seem to be multiplying and create more and more complexity. But macroevolution, that one kind becomes another kind, well, that's why they call it the theory of evolution. It's not provable. There's no way we can ever prove it. And I can debate that a little bit. I tend to. But that's just me. But if you're there and that's where you're at, the text allows for that as a possible reality, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't say that that can't happen. God just says he did it. He doesn't really say how he did it. But again, for me, I think chapter 2 says that the reason we're the ones who seem sentient, we're the ones who have all this ability to create and imagine and do it is because it says the Spirit of God was breathed into humanity. That's why we're different from the monkeys, because God's Spirit dwells within us. And it was meant that way from the beginning. The third second, and it is the resurrection of Christ. That's something science can't really deal with. But those first two, I mean, he said, the reality of our book of faith says you can be a doubter and it's okay. It says you can not understand this and that's okay. It says you don't even have to believe Genesis is real, but the message of Genesis, my goodness, the order that God gave us is real, that God did this on purpose, very purposeful. And just like you said, Jim, the reality, we can't even say for certain if day 1, 2, and 3 are 24-hour days. Don't know.
Maybe this.
And that part of it, I don't know that it originated with Martin Luther. I know Wesley was fond of quoting Martin Luther and saying that in the essentials of faith, let's have unity. If it is essential to what it means to be a Christian, we better believe the same. If it's not essential to faith, then let's have liberty. We can debate whether we're predestined or we have free will. We can debate on what kind of baptism, multiple baptisms, one baptism, only spiritual baptism, only water baptism. We can debate those kind of things, and in that we can have liberty. But in all things, charity and love. We should love each other above all else. And so where we don't agree, you're never going to get me to fight you on it. It's just not worth it. But I think the story, what God is trying to tell us through this first book, explains everything about our human condition. And the poem, I think it's neat that it's a poem, because this is very artistic. Any art people in here? Any artistics in the room? No? Nobody? Okay. Some days I can be artistic, not every day, but it's very artistic in how it flows. But then for those of you who are detail, any bean counters, anybody like details and organization and order? Isn't that kind of neat now? All of a sudden for your accountant mind is like, oh, this plus this equals this. It makes sense. Like I said, I'm kind of, my jury's still out on this notion of day 7, 8, and 9, because then I get into more of that epic notion of day instead of the 24-hour notion of day. But any other questions about the grand scope of this poem?
On day 3, we see vegetation.
Yep.
Day 5, we have birds, fish, so on and so forth.
Yep.
That's the first, day 3 would be the first sign of life. Day 5 would be another sign of life, living.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk order about that.
Well, let me tell you what I have read.
Go for it.
There are those that say, life came from amino acids, all kinds of different theories, except none of that chemistry is alive.
Correct.
They said, well, this happened, like a lightning strike or whatever. As I understand the possibility of life happening coincidentally, accidentally, it's like finding one grain of sand in the middle of the Sahara Desert at night, blindfolded, and finding it twice.
So I told you my first major in college was chemistry, and I had to take a statistics course. And they say that any statistic that has a 1 and 1 in 10 to the 5th power, so that's 1 with 5 zeros behind it. So anything that's past 1 in 100,000 chance is almost a mathematic impossibility. So 1 in 1 million. I mean, that's why I'm not for sure why so many people play the lottery. It really is like getting struck by lightning. But if you go to 1 in 100 million chance, it's almost impossible to happen. The reality that this happened by chance, you could give them 1 in 100 billion, and it still is almost an impossibility. Something had to move to make this happen.
Absolutely.
Something.
That's where God comes in.
So you talked about the connection here. The first sign of life, the next sign of life. Well, what's the trajectory of this if in our chart here? What's the next step? Life rests in the Father. The whole purpose of life. First sign of life is vegetation. Next sign of life is the birds and the fish and the sea. Life's whole direction, the whole purpose, the whole meaning for creation is to find our rest, to find our being in our relationship with the Father. That's the culmination of it. He doesn't stop with day 6, does he? I mean, there's a day 7 on purpose. Day 7, God rests. And therefore all of creation rests with him. And all of creation rests in him. And so this beautiful poem, it's a poem, right? I mean, we just heard it read. It's very poetic, is it not? Point of this poem is that we as creation are for us to find our meaning in our relationship to our Creator. Any other thoughts or questions about the whole thing before we go through it paragraph by paragraph? By watching my time, make sure I'm not going to hold you guys. I don't know where I put my phone. There it is. You guys still tracking with me on there? Okay. We got only 45 minutes in. Good. All right, then let's take it section by section. So, first paragraph, we kind of dug into this quite a bit, so we may not have any other things you notice about it, and this is where I really want to hear if you guys have a different translation, if it says something different, if that really stands out to you, make sure you say that. So, verses 1 and 2 is my first paragraph. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. What do you notice? Anything stand out to you?
He rests.
Huh?
He, it would be like he was resting, trying to think of what he wanted to do next.
Do you think, okay, so that's an interesting notion. Do you think God was thinking about what he was doing? Or do you think he just did it? Does it make a difference?
Yeah.
Okay?
There is definitely order to everything. There's no reason to think that he would do anything for you.
You know, as you were saying, the picture of I'm not an artist by any stretch. I'm somewhat artistic. I've got control a little bit, but I remember taking a little bit of art history, and they said that often before a sculptor would sculpt out of marble, they'd stand in front of the block, they would try and figure out what's inside of that block of marble, and then they'd try and make that come to life. It was a little cheesy at the time, and not a big deal. Kind of get the sense of God hovering over this earth saying, what are we going to put here? What next? What are we going to do? There's almost a playfulness about it, isn't there? That the Spirit is hovering over it.
You think maybe he was having fun creating some of these creatures?
Oh my,
The
yes.
dinosaurs and the flying,
Oh my.
and all those things.
If you don't believe that our God likes to have fun, just look at creation. Just look at all the animals. I mean, my goodness. If our God doesn't have a sense of humor, why in the world would he make the duck-billed platypus? I mean, it's a mammal that lays eggs and is poisonous. Why didn't he just put wings on it? Let's just do everything, right? It swims in the water, it walks on land, it lays eggs, it's a mammal, it has a tail, kind of like a beaver, it's got a bill like a duck, and it screeches, I think. It doesn't even quack or anything. And then on top of it, I'm serious, the thing is poisonous. It's like one of the only mammals that's poisonous. You know, if our God doesn't have a sense of humor, my goodness.
Could that just been part of the ongoing creation?
It could be.
We created animals that created platypus.
Well, you know, I made mention of that whole notion of kind. The platypus are in a kind of their own. They are it. You know, when you talk to someone who believes in evolution, they don't know what to do with that thing.
That was one of those kinds that didn't work out.
It was a kind that didn't work out and probably shouldn't work out, but it does. It's there.
What goodness about
it's got a little stinger under its tail, and it can poison you. It's kind of like an insect in that fashion. But yeah, I think as I read this, there is a notion of a playfulness about God, that he's getting ready to create something. And so this isn't just about ordering. I think that from the beginning of creation, God looked at everything he was doing and he enjoyed it. He enjoys us. He finds joy in us.
And also, he said he was well pleased.
Absolutely. He was well pleased with what he was doing.
He also made poison ivy.
mosquitoes.
A little bit tediousness.
So I tend to lean towards the whole poison ivy and mosquitoes, and I'm not for sure what wasps are for. You know, there's some things that I'm going to have to ask God, but I'm guessing before we fell and creation got cursed, they had a better purpose. That's my hope.
Sounds good. All right.
When I think of creation, I even go deeper. I mean, you think about all the little veins in a hummingbird
Oh my, yeah.
and the feathers.
Hummingbird is a physical anomaly. It says hummingbird shouldn't work. Bumblebees, bees in general shouldn't work, but
They didn't tell me that.
just don't tell the bee, sorry, you can't fly, it's not allowed, you don't follow our rules.
Well, going to what Sarah says, coming from my background, I marvel at the inner workings of the organs in the body. I mean, that can't be happenstance. There is so much order in there. Even the eyes, the ears, the heart, the lungs, all that.
I forget the term, but for the scientists to affirm evolution, they talk about that there is a reality that multiple things had to have evolved at the exact same time in order for something to work. You know, the reality that most insects live a very short lifespan. So how in the world could they evolve fast enough to get to that next thing? But the reality of just the human eye, just the fact that the eye exists at all, but not just the fact that the eye exists, but to go from any other creature's eye to the complexity that the human eye sees. It's crazy. And so, yeah, there's this wonderful attention to detail in what God has done. I mean, whenever I first read this, I didn't see any order in it. In fact, to be honest with you, it seems silly that God created light and dark first and not the sun, the moon, and the stars first, doesn't it? I mean, kind of the way we get taught. That doesn't make any sense. Why would he worry about water before he'd worry about ground? I mean, aren't most of the planets all ground and then you put water on it? I mean, if I was doing it, I probably would have done it totally different. But there's a complexity and a beauty in what he's doing. Like you said, he sees it as very good. Each step of the way, he says it's good. And at the end, he says it's very good. Anything else stand out to you in the first couple of verses?
Yeah.
Go for it.
He's still moving on the water. He's in a darkness.
So there's a reality that God is always bringing order out of chaos, light out of darkness. You know, there's something interesting about this. The Jewish people, do you know when they say their day begins? It begins at evening. At sunset, they start the next day. So in the Jewish way of counting days, it always starts in darkness and ends in light. Isn't that kind of nice? The day always starts in darkness and always ends in light. How does our day start? It starts in darkness, we go to the light, and then we end in darkness. I just wonder, I wonder if that doesn't have something to do with why we have so much depression. We start bad, we go good, and then it goes back to bad again. And then we wonder why things always seem bad. I don't know. I find that unique that the Jewish people, the way the story is written, it says start in dark and end in light. Always end in light. The way they organize their books, it always ends in high notes. The way their whole Old Testament, if you put that together for the Jewish people, it ends with the prophets and the people being in exile, but at the very end of the story, the king is sitting with the kings again. And there's this notion of hope that they might be a people again, because the king that was in prison is now sitting at the table of the king of Syria. So they just have this reality of starting in black and void and darkness and deep, and moving into light and order and life. Anything else you notice, or any questions that makes you ask?
Well, apparently there was already water on the first day.
So not only did we have earth, but we also had some water, right?
Right. And then he didn't separate them and make them into seas until the second day.
It was here that he separates water.
It's almost like it started from water.
Okay, so what's unique about that?
Where the water comes from.
What's water a symbol of? What? Rebirth. From the beginning, it's been a symbol of not just rebirth, but birth. You come out of the water when you're born. So think poetically here, God is birthing the earth out of the water. Now, we could ask the question, where did the water come from? Where did the earth come from? And he doesn't give us that answer, but remember, this is a poem. But there's something really neat about that, isn't there? If water is a symbol of birth, rebirth, or birth, then he's birthing all of this out of that notion. It's not just a creation, but it's a birth that's taking place.
You know, another thing is, Earth's core still holds on. So maybe the water helped cool the earth.
Absolutely. We'll see this reality of water above and water below. It's going to play into the story as we go on. Hannah, you still tracking? See your thumb. She used to sit right here beside me when we were in Tell City, and so I always looked over at her to make sure she's tracking with me. Anything else you notice in these first couple of verses? My next paragraph goes 3, 4, and 5, so let's read that. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. What do you notice?
He didn't call the darkness.
What?
He didn't call the darkness, just the light.
But he also didn't call the darkness bad, did he? We have this notion of implying that just because something is said is not called good, then it must be evil, right? Because we think evil is the opposite of good. But nowhere in there does God say that darkness is evil, does he? But he does say that the light is good.
What did he divide the light from the darkness?
Well,
I have a theory.
go for it.
That day he started the earth spinning.
Okay.
Up to that point, it was just floating.
Okay. So we know that day is from the spin of the earth, right? That the sun is on one side, and when the sun is towards us, that's day, and when the sun is away from us, that's night. There's another reality here, like there's this kind of notion that day, light, and dark are intertwined, aren't they? And there's this notion of separating and ordering to them. How exactly he did it, I don't know. It doesn't really say how God did it, except that he does it. You know, that's one of the things. There's some things about this life with God, we're not going to know everything. In fact, I think God doesn't tell us how he did it, so we don't try to recreate it somehow. Because let's face it, as human beings, if we are told how to do something, we're going to try and do it, aren't we?
In his description of the day, he said there was evening and there was morning, so he starts with the evening like we said.
Yes. He starts with evening and moves to morning and dark to light. Notice, God never stops until he has identified everything. He names things. He gives them purpose, name, being, entity. Nothing goes unnoticed with God. I always find that interesting. In a couple of verses, I guess in chapter 2 or 3, somewhere around there, we have Adam naming the animals. I always find that interesting because I'm pretty sure God already had a name for it. He's just letting Adam join in it. Because it's very clear, God never does anything that he doesn't give it meaning and purpose when he does it. What you got?
Oh, I'm just sitting here thinking, all these thoughts just thrown out that include what you just finished with. But through all this time that we're talking about this passing, God's allowed to create service. As a creator. I never quite thought of it from that perspective.
I think one of the key aspects of the image of God that is within us is this need to create and to order. We have the creative types, the artists, the musicians, the singers, the poets, the storytellers, but then we also have the accountants and the builders. There's an order and a creative side, and both of them are made known here at the beginning, and they are both a part of this image that God gives to us. And so I don't think that one is more godly than the other. The poet is no more godly than the actuary. The artist is no more godly than the one who systematizes things and makes sure that everything has a place. Both of them are what God does. Anything else you notice in the rest of day 1? Or any questions that you find yourself asking? I promise I won't call out everybody, but he just had to look like he had something he was thinking on. So. Anybody? And we can always come back to it if you think of something later. And between now and next week, if you come up with other questions, don't hesitate to write them down and bring them. Anything else? Okay. Let's grab another one. 6, 7, and 8 is my next paragraph. Anybody else's paragraph a little different? Or is that good enough? And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the water that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. So what do we got here? We got some water and some space in between, right? Kind of what it seems like it's done. Nothing?
My translation says vapor, so that
Vapor.
speaks to me a little bit better than water.
So, okay, what do we know about water? How do you find water? 3 forms of water? Okay, what are they? Ice, water, steam, vapor, gas. So don't we know that actually we have to have water in the air or else we can't breathe? You guys know that, right? If the air is too dry, then your lungs actually shrivel up and die because there's not enough water to keep them hydrated. And so we have water, what?
They've been hydrated this week. I can
We've had a lot of water in the air.
tell you.
And in fact, we know we've got to be cautious about how much water we have in the air because we got to have dehumidifiers, don't we? Because there's too much water in the air sometimes. I think prior to the fall, everything was in perfect balance and there was the perfect amount of water in the air and perfect amount down. You know, we don't like too much water on the ground either. It's called a flood, right? That kind of goes poorly.
We were in water for 9 months.
You know, there's some estimate that there is almost as much water in the sky right now as there is on the earth. Between the clouds and what's in the air that we breathe. Now, I don't know if there's any truth to that, but I find it interesting. Just because we're using the term water doesn't mean that there's literally pockets of water floating around up there, but then there might be. I mean, technically, isn't that what a cloud is? I don't know. Now, I know that this will come into effect a little later, especially once we get to the story of Noah. And there's definitely water in the sky, and there's definitely water under the earth. But yeah, it could be vapor. It could be that the water in the sky, actually, we know that there's a barrier that we call our atmosphere, and that the water in the sky actually protects us from the volatile side of the sun. So when people say, well, there's no water in the sky, what are you talking about? Well, yes, there is. And God created the system in such a way that it actually keeps us safe.
Hydrogen hydroxide.
Okay?
There's your sign.
Say your next thing.
What is hydrogen hydroxide?
Well, hydroxide is HO, but dihydrogen oxide is water. So hydrogen hydroxide is probably H2O. What else stands out to you about day 2? Anything?
I have the New International Vision,
Okay.
and God said, let there be a gulf between the waters to separate water from water. So God made the gulf and separated the water under the gulf from the water above it. And so it was. God called the gulf sky, and there was evening, and there was morning the second day.
Okay. So what's your question?
How would you determine what a gulf?
You guys okay with this? I took a picture and I'll try and post it. Can I erase this now? Let's try and figure out what we're dealing with here. Chris, I'm letting you know I ordered a big one. Just letting you know. I don't know what category that goes in. But I'm afraid I'm going to knock this thing off because. So let's just see how God's got it. I mean, we're gonna go colors. We're gonna do blues, right? Water's blue, right? So what do we got? We got water below, right? And we got water above. That's what it says, right?
Yeah.
And then it says there's this thing called, yours said a vault, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else? Anybody else to say something different?
Space.
Space. So we got vault,
Expanse.
space, expanse. Mine even said dome. Mine says expanse. Anybody else say anything else?
Firmament.
Firmament. Firmament. Sky. I didn't do this on purpose, but to me it kind of looks like hands. You know, let me go back just a second. The word hovering in verse 2, the word is more of the notion of brooding.
That's what my,
Yours uses the word brooding. Anybody ever seen a mother brooding over their babies? So we talked about that notion. You said water and birth, mother brooding over the spirit brooding over. Kind of get that picture, don't you? Whatever this expanse, dome, vault, space, sky, it's brooding over us.
What the message says.
Really?
And it says, God's spirit brooded like a bird above the waters.
So that's what it's saying, right? There's something here that's separating the water above from the water below. There's something dividing this out. And again, God does everything on purpose, right? So this is here on purpose. Do we know its full purpose yet based on what we've read? But again, like I said, we know today that without the atmosphere, this thing hovering over us, we would actually be so pelted by cosmic radiation that humanity would fry and not exist. We couldn't have plant life. So God put a space, a vault. I like the notion of vault, something to protect, right? But this, again, sorry, this is not a science book at all. There's nothing scientific about this book. It's just a book of faith, right? Sorry. I'll put my facetious side away for a second. What you got, Hannah? Nothing? Okay. You're the only one left, so. Anything else? Or, I mean, just interesting, right? That word vault. I mean, you want to keep going? I don't know. What time is it? I said I'd stop at an hour and a half. I promise I'll try and keep it to an hour and a half. I'll stay beyond that if you need me to, but I don't want to go any longer than that if we don't have to. Read another one? Let's keep going. Okay. 9 and 10 is my next paragraph. And God said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered into one place, and let dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. I get brown now. Brown. So we have water down here, right? He says he gathers it. And he gathers the land together. We got this brown chunk of land, right? My brown's not working very good. That's a brand new marker.
yeah. All right,
That's what we see, right, so far? It says he gathered all the ground together and he called it earth. Oh, sorry. So he calls this seas. Seas. Remember, he labels everything. He doesn't give everything. Nothing goes without a purpose, right? We got earth. We already labeled that up there, right? What do you notice about this paragraph? Anything? Anything stand out to you? Anything make you question or wonder what in the world's going on? What? So it's under the heavens. So we know. So there's this notion of up and a notion of down. There's a reality that there's something beyond.
Mine says under the sky.
Under the sky.
It doesn't speak of heaven's mind. I got it.
So let me just throw something out here, just so you guys know. The Hebrew language is incredibly expressive and incredibly simple. English, we have hundreds of thousands of words, right? Most of them we borrowed from other languages, but English, it can be both very expressive, but then, we've got the thing about love, and it's all very plastic. Hebrew only has 900 words. That's it. they call them roots, sets of 3 letters. And so you have these concepts, these roots. So the one I like to talk about is the 3 letters that we would translate MLK. MLK, when you're talking about just a noun as a thing, it means kingdom or country. If it's a specific noun or a thing and it's masculine, it means king or ruler. If it's a feminine specific nouns, it means queen. If it's a young male masculine term, it means prince. If it's a young female noun, it means princess. If you make it an action, a verb, it means to reign or to rule over, to have dominion over. We get that word here in just a little bit. So they have this one root concept that has this breadth of meaning. It's both very simple, but very expressive. Do you get what I'm saying? And so part of what we have a problem doing is whenever you take Hebrew, which is very simple, but extremely expressive, and then you try and put it into English, well, that's why we've got firmament, vault, space, expanse, dome, sky, because that one word has all of that connotation. Does that make sense? And so depending on who you're talking to, who's gets the final say in the translation, they choose which word they think best makes sense. Which is why I love in Bible study if we've got multiple translations, because it's neat to see what they choose. And that's not saying they're trying to be inaccurate, it's actually saying they're trying to be more accurate, because English is an extremely specific language, but Hebrew is broad, it's kind of full, it's a pregnant language. You have to draw some of the meaning out of it. Does that make sense? So whenever we have words that don't, one translation says one thing and another says another, we got to figure out what the commonality is. And to some extent, we can see all these words here, and you can see how they're interrelated, can't you? But yet, any one word by itself doesn't carry nearly the meaning that they do together. You get what I'm saying? That makes sense? Anything else through the first 10 verses? Any questions? Okay, let's at least finish the 3rd day. We ought to at least get through that far, right? 11, 12, and 13 is my next paragraph. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit in which there is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seeds according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit in which is their seed according to each kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning the 3rd day. So we get 2 different kinds of plants, right? We get the little plants, and then we get trees, right? See, I'm really artistic, can you tell? Oh wait, they're fruit trees, right? We get fruit trees. I'll pull some bread. Get some apples. But then you think about, okay, let's just talk about plants. Aren't there essentially 2 different kinds of plants? You've got short plants and you've got tall plants, right? Well, okay, what you got, Kay?
I don't have anything, I just visualizing a short plant.
I mean, there's grasses and there are flowers and bushes, and then you've got trees. There are trees that have fruit and there are trees that don't have fruit. There are bushes that have fruits and there are bushes that don't have fruits. There are plants that have fruits, they just have a seed, and there are plants that have fruits as well. I mean, we're in the middle of, it's zucchini season, right? It's got a fruit. But then there's also wheat that just has a seed. So there's both fruit bearing plants and seed bearing plants. What? A weed, on a technicality, is any plant that is growing in a spot you don't want it. It could be a good plant. It's just going down 5th Street here in Decatur from, what is that, Monroe to Adams, there is a corn stalk growing in the middle of the street. Corn is a good plant, is it not? Corn is a very good plant. But right there, it's a weed. A plant out of place is a weed. So technically, God even made arrangements for weeds. Still going to ask him about that. I want to know what its purpose was, because I don't think God made anything bad. Have we heard the word bad yet? Again, that whole notion, you brought it up. He said the light was good. So we automatically assume the darkness is bad, don't we? I mean, that's just our human nature, but God never calls the darkness bad, does he?
It's the color.
But he did say everything he created was good. And he created darkness and light, didn't he?
The darkness is so weak.
What is it?
The darkness is so we could rest.
And that is good.
And that is very good.
For the darkness, we wouldn't see the stars.
Wasn't for the darkness, we wouldn't see the stars. You know, it's so interesting to say that we've got our foreign exchange student, Ji Sung, and she grew up in a city, a huge, what I would call a mega city. Her apartment is on the 11th story of a 30-story building. And even though she can see the sky during the day, there is so much light in her city, she had never seen the stars until she came here. So, of course, we had to take her out in the middle of nowhere on Braxton's family farm so that she could just see it. Darkness is not bad. We are the ones who have attributed darkness with bad, haven't we? Because we just hear this notion of light being good. So if light is good and light and darkness seem to be opposite of each other, then we got to ascribe darkness as bad, don't we?
But darkness can never overcome light. But light can overcome darkness.
Very true. And so I just want to reiterate, everything that God has made, he originally made as good. Very good. Those are the two things he says throughout this poem, isn't it? Everything is good. And on the 6th day, when he makes us, it's very good. Any other thoughts or questions? We got 9 minutes. Do you want to do one more day, or do we need to stop? Okay. 4th day, 14 through 19. Oh, we get a whole bunch of stuff here. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. That's what you pointed out, right, Jim? We don't get days and years until here. And I lost my place. 15. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. So he created light first, but now he's creating something to give light. And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning the 4th day. I want to use all my colors. So we got a sun, right? Sun to rule over day. And we'll go with this one. Keep white. Moon and stars. Stars for night. Right? probably did those wrong, didn't I? Because we get the moon, the morning, the night first. Gosh, that's gonna drive me nuts. Put it down. Hannah knows me. She knows that this is gonna drive me nuts, and before next week, I will erase that and put those back up there. Everything has its place. I'm both the artistic and the organizer. I'm a little bit of both. That's gonna drive me nuts. Okay. So what else? What do you notice? What questions does it ask of you? Or what questions do you want to ask it? What you got, Myra?
Well, like on day one, like in your first chart, day one's informed that, and now he's filling it up.
Absolutely. So the first set of 3, he's making, and then the second set of 3, he's filling. There we get this being filled now, don't we? And it is full. Now, granted, there's a lot of emptiness out there too. We now know space is a lot of emptiness, but there are hundreds of billions of stars everywhere, more than we could ever count. I think that's funny because, you know, astronomers used to think that we knew how big our galaxy was and we knew how many planets there were, and then they keep discovering new planets. And I think it's like God says, okay, you think you know what you're doing? Look a little closer. Guess what? I've got more for you. Anytime we think we figure it out, God just, go ahead, think you got me figured out.
You know, that's like science. Every year, scientists discover new things. Been there all the time.
Been there the whole time.
But God decided we weren't ready for it yet.
So, and think about that. So every year our scientists discover new things, right? We discover new realities about this world that we've had for at least the last 6,000 years. I mean, bare minimum, if you follow the biblical timeline, we're about 6,200 some odd years in, I think. But every year they keep discovering new things, but God did it all right at the beginning. He knew our inquisitive nature, and he was going to hide all these little Easter eggs. Isn't that what we call them? You know, these things that you didn't know they were there, and yet they were there all the time. Go for it.
Okay, so the first 3 days,
Yep.
and I think of this as like somebody creating something. Sometimes when you start creating something, you just do a base for
Yep.
what you think you want to create, but you're just going to start with something simple.
Mhm.
And then when you get those things done, then you're like, okay, now what can I add to it to make it better? Not that he necessarily had, I mean, if he had the plan and he knew what he was going to do for all 7 days, why didn't he just do it all at once? Like, bang, 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 this is what I want. He could have just done the first 3 days and then been, okay, now what do I do with these things that I created to make them better?
Okay.
And then just go from there. And so in that light, even today, he's still creating from what he originally did those first 3 days.
So isn't he still creating in us?
Right. But that kind of negates the fact that he knew from the get-go what like all 7 days were going to be. I mean, if that was the case, he could have just done it all.
What day are we in?
Well, like I said, it depends on who you talk to. They might, like I said, I've got this postulation over here of day 7, 8, and 9, but I kind of got this picture. You guys, maybe you watched it, maybe you did. When I was a kid, Bob Ross's show, he always says, we're going to do this. And that's what he starts with. But what he finishes with in his painting always is so much more. And there's a sense in which that makes sense to us as human beings, right? Because everything's unfolding for us. We are within time, aren't we? I mean, we live by time. I mean, my goodness, here I'm watching my time. I've got 2 minutes. So I promised I told you guys I'm done. And there's a sense in which time is a good thing, isn't it? It's how we order our days. Days are important to us. So we know when to start doing something and when to stop doing it. But I think that there's a sense in which, remember, all of this happened. All these first 6 days happened before there was ever a human being. anything. So whether or not God did it all at once, God spoke the Big Bang and it happened over millions of years, or literally it was a split second and everything, all of the complexity of our world happened at once. This poem is saying God is creative in how he's doing it. And so I don't know. I think there's a sense in which I think God knew exactly what he was going to do from the very beginning. And there's a sense in which, I don't know, is there anybody in the room that doesn't have kids? But you guys have both mentored people, right? You've helped people learn things. Have you taught anybody anything?
Yes, we have.
Okay. When you're teaching somebody something, you can do the whole thing very quickly, right? And maybe they'll get it and maybe they won't. Right? Some people are quick at learning and they can just watch you do it and that's enough for them to get it. But oftentimes, if you really want them to learn it, you give it to them in stages, right? You say we do this, and then we do this, and then we do this. There's a purpose to it, a method to it. And so there's an order to it. And so to a certain degree, I probably am actually more inclined to say God did this. He just did this. And it really didn't take God 6 days to do it. I mean, the moment day 2 is started, he goes, okay, this is what we're doing. And in a nanosecond, all of it was done. And he's like, all right, let's watch it for 24 hours. Yeah, let's just see how it goes. I mean, that's the way God is, isn't he? I mean, he's all powerful. Did he really need 24 hours to make all that complexity in that day? He didn't need, but even in a nanosecond of a nanosecond to do all of it.
Yeah, but you know, an apple tree is not gonna grow to full height overnight.
Unless he wanted to.
Unless he wanted to.
I mean, he created Adam and Eve full grown, right? So he could create the apple tree full grown.
Oh, just for that debate, just so you know, officially, which came first? The chicken.
The chicken.
The chicken came first, and then it laid the egg. Just so you know.
Chicken had an egg in it.
It had an egg in it. Oh, so wait a second. Maybe the chicken didn't come first. God created them both at the same time. The egg was already in the chicken. There. Dang it! I thought I had it figured out.
What else is better?
So I think to your point, our God is big enough. He didn't need 6 days to do this at all. And whether he actually took 6 days, I don't know. But he inspired humanity to write this poem and at least 2 sets of 3 to see a creation and a filling. And show that God is always about this notion of creating and filling and naming and giving purpose. That there's nothing in this world that God hasn't created and filled and named and given it purpose. You ever have a day where you don't feel like you got a purpose? You ever have a day where you're not for sure that you're worth much of anything? You ever have a day where you wonder why you're here? This poem tells me God created you on purpose. He named you. He gave you being and he gave you purpose. And if you're here, you still have name, you still have being, you still have purpose. That's what this poem tells me. Now, does it say that anywhere in here? Not explicitly. But when you read it and you let the poem speak what God is doing in it, doesn't it say that though? I mean, isn't that what you're getting from this? And we haven't even finished the first chapter. For me, the first 12 chapters of Genesis, what we call prehistory. Pre anything that we can know for certain when it happened. Speak to the realities of the human condition. It tells us everything we need to know about who we are, why things are the way they are and why God is doing what God is doing. And right here from the beginning, we're not even halfway through, and God has said, I've done this on purpose, and it's I made you on purpose, and you're good. Don't let anybody else tell you that you're not good. Don't let anybody else tell you you don't have purpose. Don't let anybody tell you you are not made in my image. It doesn't matter if you're the creative side of me or the ordering side of me. Both have purpose. Both are good. I mean, my goodness, do we need to know anything more than that? Doesn't that make you want to worship God? Thanks, God. And like I said, what was this poem written for? Written for worship. When we could just read this and move on. I mean, I'm doing the Bible in a year, and you're reading at least 3 chapters a day, and some days you're just reading through chapters and you miss what's going on, and we can gloss over it and not worry about it at all. But when you stop and you let the God of the universe speak his message of love to you, isn't it amazing what he hides right in plain sight for us? That's probably a good place to stop, isn't it? Let's pray. God, I thank you that we're wonderfully made, each and every one of us. And even when the brokenness of this world, and even when the brokenness within ourselves tries to tell us something else, Lord, you still remind us you made us good. You made us on purpose. You named us, and you give us purpose. And that purpose is to be in relationship with you, and that is truly very good. So, Lord, as we go our separate ways tonight, may we just remember that truth. May we live in that truth. And when we encounter darkness in this world, Lord, may we give light. When we encounter chaos, may we work with you to bring order. When we see the void, may we work with you to create good. And Lord, may we glorify you by all that we say and do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. So, is this how you expect the Bible study to be? I hope so. If you haven't been in a Bible study like this, well, welcome to How I Do It. And this is what we'll do every week. Thank you, guys. I'm going to stop the recording. Thanks for sticking it out, Hannah. Why did it stop?